Alright guys, so back with another video going over if the hamstrings work on a leg press and also a squat. So if you've not seen them, I've made two other videos going over things regarding the hamstrings, like if you work it leaning forward on a seated hamstring curl, or if you stretch your hamstrings further, if you should or not, and as well as that, if you should elevate your toes on an RDL. So be sure to check out those videos first, so that will make this one a bit easier to understand. First of all, I'm going to quickly run over again the anatomy of the hamstring. So the hamstring basically starts above the hip and inserts below the knee. So basically, it doesn't start below the hip, so it doesn't join on below your bum, it joins on above it, which is why when you bend your hips back, you stretch your hamstring. Your hamstrings then insert below the knee joint, which is why if you straighten your leg when you're stretching, when you're bending down, you'll stretch your hamstring further, which is why an RDL will fully stretch your hamstring, for example. A fully shortened hamstring is when you've got your heel up to your bum, and yeah, pretty much that's a fully shortened hamstring. A good example in the gym would be a line hamstring curl machine. That would get you quite close to a fully shortened hamstring, so a fully shortened in length instead of a stretched one, if that makes sense. So now we know basically where the hamstrings originate and insert. What's the role of the hamstring? Like I said, to basically, if you think about it, if the muscle pulls, if the muscle's trying to get shorter, what's it going to do? So during, let's say, an RDL, it's going to want us to drive us upright. If you think about the hamstring like being a string, right, if we're doing an RDL, I'll quickly draw it out. So RDL, let's say we're bent over at the hips, that's your hip there. If your hamstring pulls, that's your hamstring, joins there, starts there. It's going to want us to go upright. It's going to want to straighten us at the hips, if that makes sense. So now that that's established, when it comes to like a seated hamstring curl, to basically shorten it, what it's going to want to do is pull our leg from being straight to bent. So pretend that's my leg. It's going to want to pull us from here to here. Now that we understand that, do we work them during a leg press or a squat? So as I touched on, when we're doing a hamstring curl, for example, it wants to take your leg, pretend that's a seated hamstring curl. It wants to take your leg from this position to this position. It wants to basically drive it down if you're going to be using your hamstring. It wants to shorten it in length. It wants to take it from here to here, right? What's happening when we're doing a leg press? If we look at kind of the same joint, your knee, if we look at the hamstring, when the platform comes down, so when that starts coming towards us, what's happening? We're going to be bending our leg further. As I've just went over, when we're doing a hamstring curl, your hamstring, if your hamstring's wanting to, let's say, move away, it's wanting to bend your leg. So if we're doing a leg press and the weight's actually trying to bend our leg, then we're not going to be working our hamstring very much. It will help us stabilise the exercise. However, it's not going to be working a lot because it's making it easier for yourself. It's like going on a leg extension and trying to train your hamstrings. You're not gonna. It's doing the opposite of what your hamstrings want to do, if that makes, or it's helping your hamstrings. It's making your hamstrings work less because it's pushing it in the direction your hamstring wants to do. Because if you're on a leg press and I say squeeze your hamstring, you're going to bring your knee up towards your chest. You're going to get yourself in the bottom position of leg press. So it will actually do the opposite. So you're not going to be working it a lot during leg press, except from maybe stabilising it. The same applies from a squat. When you're doing a squat, once you're at the top of a squat, you're actually getting your hamstrings from quite a stretched position to quite a bent position. For example, I'll rub that out just so it's not in the way. So if we're at the top of a squat, oops, wrong pen, right, we're going to run with it. If we're here, let's say that's a guy squatting, let's say he's got a bar on his back, that's him holding the bar. There's the bar there. Your hamstring is quite short in length. So I'll get my other pen out. So let's say that's your knee. Your hamstring's quite short in length, so it's going from shorten to stretch. But when we're thinking about it, you're not actually using your hamstring to get to the bottom. Your hamstrings may be contracting, but your hamstring wants to kind of get in that position, so it's not actually working it, if that makes sense. It's maybe changing length very slightly, if that makes sense. And like I said at the start, our hamstring crosses over two joints. Our hamstring starts above the hip, joins on to below the knee, above the hip, below the knee. So when we are trying to train a muscle, let's say we're trying to train our hamstring during an RDL or during any sort of kind of hamstring exercise. It's called a biarticular joint or biarticular muscle, sorry, because it crosses two joints. So two joints will influence the length of the hamstring. So if we're trying to influence the length of the hamstring, if we're moving one joint, we want to keep the other still. For example, if you are trying to train the hamstring during like a seated hamstring curl, you'd want to keep the hips still and move at the knee. If you're wanting to do an RDL, you want to keep your knee still and move at the hips. When we're doing a leg press, yes, we are bending at the knee, but we're also extending at the hips. So while we're shortening the hamstring, we're actually lengthening the hamstring. Same applies here. As we're going down, instead of actually shortening the hamstring, we are moving both joints. So we are maybe, if we kept, let's say, if we're doing a squat and we kept the knee completely still and we just pushed our hips back, that would lengthen it. But because we're moving both joints, you're not actually changing the length of the hamstring. So we're just kind of moving through space, but the hamstring's staying a very similar length, if that makes sense. Which is why you don't get a sensation of a stretch during basically any portion of doing a leg press or doing a squat. So basically, the joints that influence the hamstring will be moving, but not the length of the hamstring as much, if that makes sense. And it's not actually making your hamstring work, although your hamstring might be moving very slightly, because it's doing the opposite of what will train your hamstring. If you wanted to train our hamstring, let's say our feet were glued to the platform and there was resistance pulling the platform up, and we had to drive our heels towards our hips on a leg press, for example. Let's say we put resistance bands joined onto the leg press, pulling it away. We had no weight on the sled, and let's say your feet were super glued to it for whatever reason, you're pulling your heels down. That would then work your hamstring. Same applies during the squat. Let's say there was weight actually pulling you up and you had to, with your feet super glued to a surface, you need to pull yourself down. That would work your hamstring. But it's opposite, so you're not going to be working your hamstrings very well throughout. It's like doing a tricep exercise for your bicep. You're going to maybe change the length of your bicep very slightly, but it's not actually putting force in a way that's going to actually challenge that muscle, if that makes sense. Thank you very much for watching the video. The full video is available for my online coaching clients in the Coached by Charlie education section. If you are interested in online coaching or where else you can find me, please feel free to have a look at the links in the description. And lastly, if you did enjoy the video, any support is greatly appreciated, so drop me a like, comment what you enjoyed about it, and lastly, subscribe for more content from myself.